what is your biggest fear?
My biggest fear is actually technology going wrong. I'm extremely worried about that. We, as technologists, we have in our hands something that is very powerful, and each and every one of us participating, we're shaping this thing. And if we don't shape it right, this could go extremely wrong. And so I'm actually, when I go in dark, I'm going in those moments, and then I'm thinking, what are we doing? What if taking to the extreme, some of these applications could go really wrong, right? So that's what I'm most worried about. And it's the role we play, and therefore ultimately the role we have in that.
Well, I'm glad we've got you in there trying to make sure it goes right. Marieke Flament, welcome on to Searching for Mana.
Thanks for having me, Lloyd.
Pleasure to have you on the show. For a fuller introduction, as career trajectories go, you'd struggle to find one more northbound than Marieke Flament's. Born in France and trained as a computer engineer, Marieke has studied and worked across the globe in several high-profile roles and companies. She was global CMO at Circle and CEO at NatWest's online business banking offshoot Mettle, before joining blockchain foundation NEAR at the start of this year as the CEO. So, really excited to cover your background, see what the audience can learn as lessons from that, some of the challenges as well, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
And really excited to dig into NEAR. Was at the Paris blockchain conference, and fortunately got to catch up with you and see a lot of the stuff you guys were putting on there a few weeks ago, and really like the vibe that we're looking for when we're trying to work out who should we get on the show. What would be really fascinating to an audience was just 10 out of 10. So really want to find out what's going on with you guys right now. If you could be so kind to introduce really what your role is at NEAR Foundation, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll probably start first with like NEAR and the NEAR protocol, right? Because I think that anchors what the NEAR ecosystem is, and then what the NEAR Foundation does within that ecosystem. So the NEAR protocol is a layer 1 protocol within the landscape of blockchain, and we focus on simplicity, scalability, security through actually proof of stake and being able to fully shard the network. Simplicity is really core to us, simplicity for users and for developers. But we're in that family as a protocol of like layer 1. Then around the protocol, which is open source, you have a lot of participants that build infrastructure and that build different business models and different companies. And the NEAR Foundation is a pebble within an ecosystem that is very vibrant, that grows every day. We have over 500 projects, over 500 DAOs that are active, so it's just a growing ecosystem. The foundation is a not-for-profit that is based out of Switzerland, and that the mandate of which is actually 3 things. So the first one, we exist because we are here to help raise awareness of the technology of actually open web and what is happening actually in the Web3 environment.
Yeah.
And we do that awareness through 2 things. One is actually having an education university program, and the second part is building meaningful partnership that can actually showcase like what the technology is capable of doing. The second mandate of the foundation is actually supporting entrepreneurs and builders who want to build on the NEAR protocol. And we do that through a grant program. We can also help redirect to companies who are funding, who are starting. Like we have network of people that we can refer to, or like pointing within the ecosystem of who can help. And then the last part and the mandate of the foundation is enabling strong governance and actually engaging also with external regulatory bodies, because as you know, like the landscape of regulation changes a lot in what we do. Yeah. And while it's not solely the role of the foundation to do that, we think we can actually help foster good and healthy conversations.
Thank you so much. So exciting. You mentioned sharding. Could you explain that to us, please? Yeah,
absolutely. So if you think of, let's take maybe proof of work, actually. So Bitcoin proof of work, and the way the network will reach consensus and the way transactions can be actually put on the ledger is by having constantly every miner mine and keep up to date the network and what's happening. Now, Near protocol works actually with proof of stake, and that's different in the sense that it's not just purely mining power that you need to put through to participate in the chain, but it's actually how much stake and how much of the tokens do you have to be a validator to be able to validate what's happening in the network. And then the concept of sharding is actually saying, rather than always having to engage 100% of all the validators that are here, how can you randomize so that you basically take different streams, and therefore sharding enables you, rather than needing to have 100% of your capacity always on, to basically take it in smaller chunks, right? So that would be my try at doing something very complicated, maybe simply.
I was watching an interview of yours, and I think you were explaining on it that if anybody says that they know everything about blockchain, that they're lying. So that was a very good explanation. I really appreciate that. So it probably feels like a lifetime because things are moving so quickly and so excitingly with Near. But you did make the decision relatively recently in your career to join. And of course, there would have been a myriad of options. Let's assume that it were the other chains, the other foundations, the other blockchain and crypto projects. What was it that resonated with you about Near?
Well, a couple of things. One is actually the technology. When I started looking about Near and the technology, I thought, oh my God, this is it. This is what was missing. Because I was in crypto before in 2015, and I worked at Circle. And back then we were already talking about tokenization of everything. And we were talking about this idea that ultimately the world will be tokenized and everything will be on chain and all those business models will happen. But the technology back then, although made progress, was still, slow and expensive and not necessarily as flexible as what we could imagine. Right? So when I looked at Near technology, I was like, oh my God, the guys have figured out how to actually do something that's truly scalable and that actually will really enable like low cost of transaction and speed. And the other part was simplicity. I think it's ultimately so important to have something that is user understandable. And Near does that, right? You can have Lloyd.near, Marieke.near. You can have accounts that are human readable, but more than that, you can embed it, for example, in apps such as, for example, say, we're doing a partnership with Sweatcoin, and you can embed that in it. And for the user, it's completely transparent. They don't know that it's powered by Near technology, right? So things like that, I thought like, that's huge to have managed to do that. And then I started digging more into actually the community and what the community was like. And I was extremely lucky to actually be at NearCon, which is the largest Near conference. And last year was in Lisbon in Portugal. And it was an amazing experience. It was like, what you described at the opening, like the vibe, the type of people you had, creators and musicians and everything, and all of that. And I had never seen that in a crypto ecosystem. So that completely sold me.
And the numbers really speak for themselves in terms of just how quickly this has come from like pretty much nowhere if you go back 4 years ago, let's say, and then in the last year, it's just completely popping. Could you give us some metrics?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I think 9 months ago, the protocol had something like 300,000 wallets. Today we're at over 6 million. Wow. So the growth has been pretty tremendous on that front. Same, like 9 months ago, you barely had a handful of projects. Today you have over 500 projects that are being built and countless being added every day and every week. Over 600 DAOs. So I think all of that is just like a picture of activation and usage and lots of things happening. And the number of developers that are active developers building on the chain also is something that's been consistently growing.
And if we think about the chain, and then if we come back to projects on it afterward, do you need more volume of engineers on the chain? Or will this over time really start to manage itself?
Well, great question. Because the chain is actually intrinsically linked to the project that I build on top, you do need an amount of developers that is continuously growing to basically all those ideas that are there. Every time we have a project that's coming, it's like, okay, how and where do we find developers for it, right? So it feels like it's infinite, the amount of it. Now, the beauty of blockchain technology in general is like it's this concept of like Lego blocks, right? So ultimately you can, because everything is open source, you can take on Lego blocks of others and start building on it.
Yep.
Meaning that the next layer of what's being built might require less engineers or less engineering than what was for the first layers. But at this stage, I mean, I think the demand is almost infinite from what I can see.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at the lack of engineers just overall for the projects in the tech space, it's vast. And so, you really need to get to the education and the awareness. And so certainly across the whole space, where it's even more scarce within Web3 crypto, there's a complete mission to try and educate and make more people want to come into the space, but also to upskill and convert individuals who might have core C++ programming skills. And actually, it doesn't take long to develop then how you could utilize that in Web3. Must be in the top 3 challenges that you have. Just talk in more detail about what you're doing.
Yeah, so it is a big challenge, right? This idea of like, how do you attract talent? Because in mainstream media, the narrative around crypto is still mostly negative. And actually, so that's a very big problem, because if you go randomly in the street and ask people for crypto, they're going to think crypto trading, they're going to think Bitcoin price, and they're going to think like bad for the environment. So that narrative we need to shift, right? Which is actually, it's not just about crypto trading, it's about Web3. It empowers lots of new business model and new creation. It's not just about Bitcoin, there's a whole flurry of different chains and way of doing things. And it's not all bad for the environment, because there is new way to do things that actually enable us, for example, to be carbon neutral as we are as a near ecosystem. So that is hurdle number 1, which is already you need people to think that this is something that is, meaningful and that is not just bad. And then hurdle number 2 is the space in itself is full of jargon, so it feels very hermetic to get in it. And the number of times every day and every week when I hear people say like, well, I don't understand it, which is why I say, if anyone ever tells you they're an expert, they're probably lying. I say that jokingly, but the reality is that it's complex for everybody. But I think as an industry, we have a duty to make it open so that people can really come and feel that they can actually come in and participate and understand. So, yeah.
I think that we're at a seminal moment where hopefully that's going to naturally happen now, with the evolution of projects that aren't just, people coming to the space, the early adopters, they're very technical. It was necessary to have jargon. It's clear now that you've got things like Sweatcoin, who we also have had on the show, that their mission is to bring 1 billion people onto the chain, right? Which aligns very nicely with you guys. And it makes sense to people. Just to recap, if anyone hasn't heard that show, Oleg, who's an amazing founder there, has got huge traction for when people are basically walking or running or exercising. The amount of steps that you participate in, you get paid in token for. And I think this relates. This is the type of project that you're like, well, I'm kind of checking that I'm doing 7,000 steps a day, or is it over 10, or have I been really bad today and only done 2,000? And Oleg described it as, we've got to think about, well, what would be an incentive to keep regular exercise? And that feels relatively basic, but then if you take it a level beyond that, if the community has great health, then this actually kicks back, as he puts it, into your health is your wealth, and it's good for the whole economy. So I think things like that can start to inspire on this point, and then you don't have to just be an engineer or a programmer thinking, okay, this would be really fascinating for me to work with cutting edge technology. You might be somebody in marketing, you could be somebody with product interest, you could be somebody who just wants to go participate in this space. So I think a big push on those type of projects is really exciting. You've kind of had some headline partnerships recently. You'd like to choose one to talk to us about? Yeah,
absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right? It's important because the amount of talent that's needed is not just developers, right? It's every function, and it's how to make new businesses work, right? So it's all that. So another partnership in addition to Sweatcoin that we've been mentioning, so SailGP. So SailGP is a sailing Grand Prix that's been co-founded by also Larry Hellison. And actually what's really interesting in that is that it's a new sport. It's a new league, it's a new entity. So they're also looking at innovation and tech. The boats are a phenomenal piece of tech. They go super, super fast. It's all powered by wind. So sustainability is at the core of the sports. diversity is at the core of the sport because they have at least a woman on each boat, and then it's racing. And it's like this new sporting league. And so what we're doing with them is basically enabling a new team to be purchased by a DAO. And so that's taking to a new level, thinking through, okay, well, what is fan engagement and what could that look like and what can that become? And we're super proud to be working with that new league because we think that first, it's a first in the sports industry. And second to what we were talking before, it's about bringing these new use cases, right? And saying like, look, this is what the technology can really be used for.
Decentralized autonomous
yes.
organization.
Talk about jargon, I'm saying no jargon.
Just to fill in that jargon that you were just
Thank you.
discussing, which is fascinating, right? If you think at the core of that, perhaps it's culture.
Yeah.
You know, just how is the weighting of decisions going to happen there is something that I'd be interested for you to talk through.
Yes, so DAO, decentralized autonomous organizations, are fascinating because it's basically a group of people coming together because they have a common passion. Then they have a multi-sig wallet where they can together govern and make decisions. And usually there is a legal entity that accompanies that. So that's like the trio of what makes what we call a DAO. And I think it's exactly what you say. Within DAO, the shift and the most important thing is actually figuring out, well, who votes on what and with what actually engagement. So we've actually been working through and detailing and the details of how that DAO could be proposed to be worked through are very soon coming. But it's actually within it, if you think of it, like what do you need to actually create a sailing team? A sailing team without a DAO has a certain number of functions that are needed. Well, those are full-time jobs that are going to be needed to be filled in the DAO. And then you actually have fans who can, vote and engage and participate. And then the mechanism of how the fans are voting and what exactly the governance is, that's still being, looked at and figured out. But it's like two layers, almost like what are the core jobs that are needed all the time, and then what's the fan engagement participation?
I love it. This is reassuring to me, I hope. I was reading The Piano Player recently, which is a great dystopian book. Quite like that genre of books for whatever reason. And, really it's painting a future where, because of advances in technology and the automation of machines for human work, there's really a middle that doesn't have much to do anymore. And, they're just given money by various governments to, paint the walls, which I think is quite depressing. What I like about thinking through DAOs is you could start to think with the evolution of technology, and let's say the automation of various traditional type of professions, how people could be stimulated, creative and engaged in a future. And I just find it so exciting that there's now technologies that allow this, and definitely want to look more into, you say there's 500 projects with NEAR at the moment. So
yeah.
That's incredible. Will some of those be the biggest organizations on the planet in several years?
Well, maybe, and I think that's where even the concept of organization is being flipped on its head, right? Because what you were saying is exactly right. Like DAO enable us to think maybe we'll work totally differently. Maybe we'll actually participate in, say, I don't know, 5 or 10 DAOs, and those DAO align with like our passions and the things that we're committed to, and then you can start thinking, well, that's a totally different type of career from what we know today, right? I think it will also require certain, like, self-drive or motivation. So it also will come with its own challenges. Yes. But ultimately, we can imagine seeing like different career paths, totally different from what we know today. But organizations, I think, it's also a fascinating concept in this whole Web3 world, because the organizations we see today are so small in terms of number of people, and you can create amazing things and very large businesses with like 5 or 10 people, which, in tech, you could create more, very fast growth with like hundreds of people, and you could do things already that were impressive. But in Web3, it's even another factor of, 10 that you can create things that are extremely big with like a super small amount of people. Yeah,
you think about the future of work and, you get, I think, a layer of individuals who are just nutcase entrepreneurs who want to build companies, and let's say that's a very small percentage because it's very challenging in the eras that we've been in. But if you think about an individual who doesn't necessarily want to do that, and you look at how they might spend their weekends, and sport is a brilliant example here, and the passion that they have for that hobby. And I think that would be where you can get such a larger mass of individuals, like super passionate, and really, using their expertise to create these fantastic communities where, everybody's on the same team. It's more like a partnership. So fascinating stuff. The last bit that would be great to cover before we go back into some of your bio is you guys have raised money from some of the biggest venture capital funds on the planet, namely Tiger in the last very large round. So how does that work, right? Let's really try and go into this so you can talk to it. Because you've got on one hand the technical protocol, which Ilya and other people are managing, and you've got, as you describe it, the foundation that you're managing, and then we have these communities on top. So what is Tiger giving you money for, and then how does that work from a control perspective?
So one for things, so Ilya is not managing the protocol. I think that's an important thing. So the protocol is now, open source, has several actors, participants on it. And so Ilya is playing an evangelist role in the ecosystem, which is very much needed, but there is definitely a broad role for that. Yeah, okay. And also working on other projects, such as, for example, Pagoda and other things. But so the way, as a foundation, one of our role is actually we look after the tokens that are actually being emitted and continuously emitted by the protocol. And so when venture capital comes in, is to say, well, how can we participate in chunks of participation for buying some of those tokens against fiat currency. And to us, that's also something that is interesting, because when we do give grants to our projects, tokens are not something that's meant to be liquid, right? So it's meant to be, you can participate, you can build within the network, you can probably stake it, which means like you make it to work in the network. But if you're building a project, you still need to pay your developers. They still need to, have their rents purchased and so on and so forth. So as a foundation, it is a good thing to have a balance and a mix of different assets, which are not just near tokens, but also which are fiat currencies.
That makes sense. But would that, if we just played that out then, and this is a tricky question to ask, would the mandate be to make the foundation at some point redundant, therefore?
It is. So at some point, redundant or different, right? So the foundation, ultimately, it's a bit like if you look at the Linux environment, right? So there is a Linux foundation. I'm not sure a lot of people are talking about the Linux Foundation, but the Linux Foundation, is here. It's also not for profit. It plays a role in the ecosystem. It's a guardian of, for example, the Linux brand and things like that. So when you think about Near Foundation and you fast forward, let's say in 3-5 years, this aspect of not-for-profit, philanthropy, education, and guardian of the brand of Near. And probably at some point also, it's possible that in the ecosystem there might be conflicts or things where you need a party to be engaged. Well, the foundation could play that role, right? So it's a role that we already play today. But I think as, funds and tokens get released and more decentralized within the ecosystem, it's fair to say that will be less a role for the foundation and more actually almost like a decentralized fund of fund, and actually safeguarding and bringing the trust that is needed for the ecosystem.
Such a cool role. So let's try and work out how you've landed this amazing opportunity, and then at the end, so excited to think through on the horizon where this could really go. Searching for Man is a show where we're trying to find the greatest entrepreneurs and leaders and innovators, and also, of course, the ventures that perhaps are the next Googles or Apples or really impactful businesses. And it feels like, that could be you guys, right? The traction's fantastic. I'd like you to really think about the first time that you started thinking who you might be in your career. And it's always more fun if you go back as far as possible.
So as far as possible, I guess. So I'm French, you can hear that from my accent, but I've been actually raised in a lot of different countries. So we moved around quite a lot with my parents, and we lived, for example, in Italy and in Holland and in different places. So I've been used from a very young age to actually move around and be in places where I don't speak the language when I get there.
Was that one of or both your parents due to work?
Yeah, so it was for my father, basically. Every 2-3 years we would be moving, and even within France we moved around a lot. So that more gave me two things. One is a sense of culture and languages that people speak makes them see the world very differently.
Yep.
And there is a need to actually understand that and adapt to that. And the second part is actually every time I was plunged into something new, it's like start again and start again. And I think that's probably the earliest, I'm not sure I would think of myself as an entrepreneur, but it's probably this earliest, like, well, build it again and do it again. So that's the early days. And then I've been trained as a computer science engineer. I went to school in Paris.
Where did that come? So firstly,
Yeah.
that trend of people moving around is very frequent with leaders or entrepreneurs for I think the reasons that you mentioned. It's fascinating to see that trend with you. But clearly the education is computer engineering, which, with hindsight, such a brilliant one to have chose. But what was the path to really selecting that?
So French culture is very much about mathematics, right?
Yes.
That's how we're trained, and we are very much trained to. If you're good, you go into mathematics. So that was definitely my path into mathematics, physics, chemistry, and all that. And then in the French education system, you have two paths. One is actually you go to university, or the second one is what we call Grande École, which is a very selective process, and it's basically, we call that a concours. So you're ranked, and then depending on the rank of what you can get into certain schools.
Yep.
And so when you say, how did you choose? I think that's where I didn't really choose. I went into it because it was the best school I could get with the ranking that I had. And I'm lucky that it was actually computer science. I wouldn't say it was where my heart was. And when I got into computer science, I had a realization of, oh my God, we're expected to code. Am I going to be a good coder? Oh no, I'm not a good coder. How do I actually find a way and do something else? It was still an amazing place. That's where I met my husband. So that's really good. But I had that realization also of seeing something quite technical, understanding the pieces, but not necessarily fitting where I was supposed to be. And so then there was a program done by the school to go and study in China. And I thought, okay, that's a very good opportunity to explore more the world, to learn another language, and actually to do something different, given I'm not going to be as good as my classmates are in coding and all of that.
And did you go with your partner as well?
So I went first alone,
Yeah.
and then he came very quickly after.
You told him how great it was.
So my husband is Spanish. We met in France, and then I first went to China, and then 6 months after, he also thought, okay, let me join and be there. And so we've been, together for this whole.
Where were you in China?
In Shanghai.
How was it? Well, and roughly when was
so
that?
Roughly that was 2004 to 2007, and then I went to Hong Kong.
So it's just starting to really pick up around.
It was, but it was the time where being expats, we were very visible. Like it was very much like, you could see us, and every time we were traveling in the countryside or anywhere, like we were, the attraction. Because we both learned to speak the language, we could go actually super, super close and really embed ourselves into the culture. It was, honestly, that was amazing. It was transformative as an experience because there is something in Chinese culture, which is there is always a solution. And that is a fundamental piece. I think, there's also optimism into no matter what, you'll find a solution. And I think that optimism is very also entrepreneurial. And then I learned so much from that. I, to this day, take it as like a great value of like, it's fine, problem, but there'll be a solution.
Yeah, it's something that I have to talk to a lot of people when they're trying to find their path in their career as a headhunter. And you can put a lot of pressure on trying to find what the occupation is over really finding what perhaps a winning mentality is. And as you describe it there, I think if you could spend 95% of your time trying, when someone hasn't quite found their flow, doing anything, it would be coaching them on that type of solution-orientated growth mindset, because then you're setting yourself up for positive serendipity throughout your career. So you found that through a lot of, I'm sure, different things, but you found that when you're in China. And then after this, you go into quite large corporations and start finding your path in your career. But what I'd be interested in is that first moment that you got drawn into fintech at Circle back in around 2016-ish.
Yeah.
Which is early. That was really the frontier. So How did you come to taking that leap of faith in that career move?
Yeah, it was not an easy decision, right? Today it looks like probably the best decision I made in my career, but back then it was not an easy decision. So at the time I was at Expedia, I was working for hotels.com, phenomenal brand, phenomenal people, and fantastic tech. And I really loved my time there. I had been, promoted every year over 4 years, so like no reason, like no clouds on the horizon. And I remember being called by the headhunter who said, hey, there's this Bitcoin startup. And I was like, okay, this must be a joke, right? Because I'm not working for Bitcoin. In my head at the time was associated with drug dealers, right? It was all about Silk Road, was all over the press, and I was like, what is he talking about, right? And I'm very lucky because the headhunter said, please read the brief. And I was like, fine, I'll read the brief. So, it's one of these moments when you will remember for life where you were when you did something. And I remember we were in a car and I was reading the brief and I had like whoa, this is big. Like the technology is big. What could happen is big. And the people who are behind this it's very big. And so I got intrigued, and then I got to meet Sean and Jeremy, the founders of Circle, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. But even then, I was full of doubts. I was like, I think I said no to Jeremy 3 times. People were really jumping in because I was like, oh my God, can I do it? Is it too risky? At the time, I think Circle had raised maybe, I want to say 70 million, so something very substantial. But
Yep.
When you're at Expedia, it looked like, it was still small. It was a team of 50 people. No, actually, I think they hadn't closed the 75. So anyway, so it looks...
And what are you leaving at Expedia at that point? Was there a clear path right to the top there?
Well, I just had been promoted Vice President of Europe, Middle East and Africa, which was
a huge
role.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's why when I left, people thought I was crazy. And I had that. I had those conversations, and people thought, you're out of your mind. What are you doing? Which is really hard because you need to reconcile sometime in your career, you need to reconcile who are you doing this for, right?
Yes.
And if you're doing things for others, or are you doing this for you, and what's the intrinsic motivation for doing that? But yeah, people thought I was full on crazy.
We still think you are.
Thank you.
So we have a expression or a saying or a quote at Mana where, because we're thinking through these things the whole time because it's about careers and ventures, where we would say you're really making these decisions in your career for your 8-year-old and 80-year-old self. And if you think things through like that, you're probably going to make the balance right when you reflect back on your career. You want to still keep, really young at heart, excited, take these type of, seminal career decisions, because look what's come since from that move. Yeah. But also, you have to have some patience and some balance. And we'll talk about compliance in a second. That's amazing. So you go and do that. And I saw a video from, when you were talking about Circle, when you must have been there for a period of time. And it was just so apparent how early on it was at that point. So you earlier in the show said that, you joined, obviously got a load of brilliant experience, but nonetheless, it's quite early then.
It is.
Technically.
Yeah.
So were there some challenges that made you, then eventually go to Mettle, which isn't a blockchain or crypto project?
Not necessarily challenges, but the whole industry went through, super high, and then the whole industry in crypto basically crashed, right?
The end of 2017?
Yeah, well, 2018 was a tough year.
Yeah.
So I left Circle early 2019. I was also about to become a mom, so there's lots of changes in, personal life, the whole space. But crypto had a very, very tough year. And so what it meant for us at Circle was we had to refocus from what business lines were we actually looking at? And at the time, we probably had something like 5 or 6 different business lines. Most were B2C, but some were starting to be more B2B. And at heart, I'm much more B2C, right? I'm not B2B traditional, necessarily like larger financial institution, which was what Circle was moving into.
Yep.
And Europe was also starting not necessarily to be like a focus. So things were just, changing and moving a lot. I met Alison Rose, the CEO of NatWest. I think she's a brilliant woman. I think she has actually, one of those very few women in a space and in banking, which is a very traditional industry, and trying to reshape and change things and do things differently.
Yeah.
And the idea was to say, well, we have some sort of a project which is called Mettle. Can we really turn that into a proper neobank? Can that stand up to neobanks, and what can we do with that? And it's separate from the bank, but what can you make of that? Very different, but I learned a ton there. I actually,
This is you becoming a
I
CEO
became a
as
CEO.
well.
Yeah, so I became CEO of Mettle, which again, like, when you look at it, some people are like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're now going in a bank. This is like, how does this fit? And so on and so forth. But I always go in for, the first thing for me, it's also the people, right? And like, who are you going to work with, and what's the vision that they have, and does that fit? Can you actually bring an impact to make that vision move forward? And so Mettle, neobank for freelancers, sole traders, very small entrepreneurs, a completely underserved market. And Mettle at the time when I joined is like a team of 50, mostly contractors, so not really a company, right? And so I had a unique opportunity to shape something and to give it a heart and a brand and to like make it something. And I think today it's fair to say it's probably one of the most successful, neobank that a bank has done, which is quite good.
Yeah, congratulations! What an experience! And this starts to put you at that point as somebody who's regularly, being honoured and given accolades as an incredibly powerful person in industry, but also as a powerful, inspiring female. We've talked about a lack of diversity in, let's just say, tech full stop, right? Beyond even fintech. And at Mana Labs, we conducted a survey across tens of thousands of employees in the tech space. And it's very interesting. You have about a 70% weighting toward men in private markets tech. And if you then start looking at the functions, then the weighting is even more toward men if it's what you might say would drive the business, so product, engineering. And then at the executive level, then this trend gets, let's say, even worse. So then we started looking at the premium universities. And actually, if you look at STEM educated graduates, it's pretty even. So that's good news. It's not necessarily that we need to inspire more diverse and inclusive talent into the right types of education, but there is some disconnect that's happening out of it into the right type of work. And you spoke about, if we use the crude kind of crypto example of, well, just a lot of people might not trust it as a career decision, much like when your friends were giving you soundboard advice about, what are you doing? You're crazy, don't go into it. So it's such a good example. But, this puts you in a position of having the ability to inspire and influence, females to come into the tech space, but also to lead as well. It's also a lot of responsibility. How do you carry that burden?
I don't think about it. I think what I'm trying to think about more is like how to create diverse and inclusive environment where whomever you are, you can actually carry yourself and actually bring your best self to work. And I think actually if you do that, then turns out not only women, but you can attract, more diverse candidates and from all walks of life. And I think that's the true thing, right? And that means actually, it means showing your weaknesses, and sometimes it's uncomfortable, and it means showing that we all have faults, and we all are trying to figure things out, and no one has the perfect answer. And yes, today I'm leading the foundation. I'm doing my very best, and I'm going to get some things right, and I'm going to get some things wrong, and I'm going to rely on what do people think. And so I think it's more, I'm very attuned to that, and how do you create those cultural and those environments. And turns out that helps actually bring and attract diverse and inclusive talent.
Yeah, so well put. So it feels like maybe the thing that's lacking in education, when somebody's coming up through the current system, and there's a lot of debate about this, of course, about education overall and how it might be able to evolve. Is that training about that mindset would be one of the most valuable things that you could give to people at that point?
Yeah, I think, so if I reflect back, there is something around confidence that we don't necessarily, teach or empower people with. And what I mean by that is, I've been very lucky to have a support network of people who believe in things for me when I don't believe in it anymore, right? So for example, Circle for me was a very big bet, and I was so scared. I was really scared of doing it. I was like, can I do it? Am I going to be able to do it? Will I really, am I making a mistake? Like all those doubts that I had in my head, because, there is the image of what you're supposed to do, and this is successful, and why would you get off the boat, right? But I think this aspect of confidence, which it's a trait that actually you find much more in young men than you find in young women.
Yep.
And for example, thinking through crypto, the jargon and the opacity of crypto doesn't help build confidence, and that's why I say if you meet someone who tells you they know everything and they're an expert, they're lying, because actually we need to all acknowledge that nobody really knows everything and it's impossible. So it's more that attitude trait of like, yes, you can do it, and if you fail, that's okay. And what have you learned from that? And how can you actually bounce back from that? But failure is okay, and it should be celebrated, rather than trying to, foster this idea of absolute excellence and you cannot fail. And I think there's even more pressure on women in general and young women, because not only do we need to achieve, careers, but then family, and then all those things that are expected from us. Well, nobody can do it all right. So what if you try your best and it's actually okay to fail, but have the confidence to say, I'm trying my own way. So that's more this trait that I think sometimes we don't talk enough about. And it has to come also from your network, like the role that partners play, the role that friends play, the role that family play, to actually, push up all those fantastic women that are everywhere.
And whilst all of this is going on, as you just said, congratulations, you've had a family.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about, outside of work, what's going on in your life.
Yeah, so outside of work, I have a 3-year-old who is absolutely, obviously the best. I think every parent will tell you that of their kid.
She's been given confidence, I assume.
It's a little boy. He's called Alex,
sure, yeah.
But Alex definitely has a view that, women can work. So it's a little boy, Alex. And then outside of work, I do a lot of sports. So sport has been a thread through my entire life and career. I play basketball. That's how I met my husband. So we both play basketball. And so being, this mix of to function, having like health and having like the mental balance, because I think kids have this unique thing to bring you in the present. Like there is nothing, I'm home, I'm a mom, right? Like, and it's just like, it's the basic thing that there is no more like, you're the CEO of this thing. It doesn't matter, right? And I think that's so grounding actually to have that, and it's so important. And it helps us to, I think, have more empathy and really understand what's going on. So yeah, so it's a lot of sports, it's a lot of family time, and it's a lot of looking after Alex.
And we were just talking before recording, and you were mentioning you've put yourself up for a challenge. You are set to run a half marathon.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, correct. In a couple of weeks.
How's the training going?
Well, so we're doing that as a group, and we're trying to motivate each other with like a little Telegram group. I'm saying, look how much I did run. I'm not sure it's going that well, but I'm very determined to finish it and to do it. And I think it's been also a really good thing to, especially in crypto, like everything is always 24/7.
Yeah.
But actually, if we don't take care of ourselves and our mental health and our physical health, then there is no way we can actually make the right decisions and and basically drive and help the ecosystem in the way that we are supposed to help it, right? So I think it's actually a very good realization for everybody that while it's a fun challenge, it's also something that's really meaningful.
When I'm training for a half marathon, then if I'm running around somewhere like Victoria Park, then to start with, for let's say the first 3 kilometers, it's hell. Like, oh my God, I'm so not in line to do well in this event. After about 5 kilometers, then the delusion starts kicking in, where I start imagining myself just winning the event. It might be the London Marathon, and in my mind, it goes to, I'll probably win it. And then by about 7K, I've stopped walking into the pub. What's the Hollywood outcome for you? Do you think you can win this half marathon?
I'm not running it to win, actually. No, but I'm running it. I loved your, how you think about it. Usually, I put some music or I listen to a podcast and I just get into it and just like, But I'm not doing that for. early on in my earlier years, actually, I played basketball very seriously. So I played to win, and I've been there. And I think there's a point where if you do sports just to win, it kind of defeats the purpose. And so today I do it to enjoy it, right?
Yeah.
And hope some days I'm really like I think I'm on top of the world. Some day I'm like, oh my God, why am I running?
Yeah, no, I absolutely feel you. I stopped timing the runs so that I could just peace out and not see how terrible the time was as well. So I want to do some quick fire questions just to finish this section. You're on the Searching for Mana show, so Mana is your magic, your superpower. What would you say yours is?
Superpower, speaking lots of languages.
Love it. If you starred on the cover of Forbes, what would the headline say?
Oh, I'm not sure I want to be on the cover of Forbes.
I was wondering if Forbes is the right example here. What's like your favourite magazine or newspaper?
Yeah, but you see, I'm not sure I want to be on it.
Oh, okay. You'd just be an empty space. She's left. Mic dropped.
Yeah.
Let me reposition it to if it was a billboard.
If it was on the billboard, I would put optimism is a force multiplier.
Boom. Love it. What does that mean?
It means actually every problem has a solution. It means like, I know sometimes we listen to the news and we think of the world and everything is going in the bad direction, but I'm like, but actually we can figure this out and we can be optimistic about what's going to happen, and from everything something good will come out.
That's going to answer what I'm about to ask, but let's do it anyway. What is your biggest fear?
My biggest fear is actually technology going wrong. I'm extremely worried about that because I mean you mentioned the book that we were talking about earlier, but Ready Player One or things like that. I'm thinking we as technologists we have in our hands something that is very powerful, and each and every one of us participating, we're shaping this thing, and if we don't shape it right, this could go extremely wrong. And so I'm actually, when I go in dark, I'm going in those moments, and then I'm thinking, what are we doing to ourselves, to humanity, to the planet? Because, what if taking to the extreme, some of these applications could go really wrong, right? So that's what I'm most worried about. And it's the role we play, and therefore, ultimately, the role we have in that.
Well, I'm glad we've got you in there trying to make sure it goes right.
Thank you.
Just a couple more. What's your proudest achievement?
Proudest achievement, probably my son. Is it cheesy? But anyway, it's my son.
Oh, that's lovely. And what is the most important book you've ever read?
So, a couple of them. I think the book from Michelle Obama I loved for her. For actually the stories and the courage of what she's saying to women. I think that book was extremely important. And I'm actually more a podcast person, so I tend to listen quite a lot of podcasts or like watch videos. And now I'm blanking, but Michael Jordan, the Netflix show, I think I also found that quite transformational.
Oh, that was unbelievable, wasn't it?
Yes.
What's a podcast you'd recommend then, other than obviously Searching for Mana?
Well, Searching for Mana, obviously, but then other than that, Tim Ferriss, I really like listening, not every interview, but like just the spirit of, people who are behind great things and how they think. And then that's how you realize nobody has a perfect recipe. There is none. It doesn't exist.
I am high-fiving you right now because it's the podcast I've listened to probably the most around Victoria Park, listening to someone talk about disrupting commerce with Tim Ferriss. But what I really love about that show, for anybody who hasn't listened to it, is Tim will get guests on from all walks of life who typically are top performers in it. Let's say it could be a grandmaster at chess, or it could be an athlete, or it could be someone who's done really well in business. But an awful lot of that show isn't really particularly on the point of what you suspect they might be talking about. So if you have Arnold Schwarzenegger on, for instance, well, you can obviously cover the many things that he's been super successful in, but I won't tend to do that. Tim will really try and prize out of that individual how their mind works. And so you can really learn from that if you listen to a lot of those shows. Absolutely love it. And then just so that I try and extract some value at this point, we always ask everybody, given it's Searching for Mana, we're trying to make sure that for the audience we're connecting from one entrepreneur and company to the next one. If there was anybody that you'd love to listen to coming onto this podcast, who might it be?
Probably, I'm going to self my own church, but Ilya, if you can get Ilya, that would be great.
Well, perhaps you could be so kind to
Maybe I can
set
help.
that up for us. We'd absolutely love that, having had the Sweatcoin show where we're showing somebody building on the platform, and then you managing the foundation, and then obviously Ilya would be such a fantastic thread. And then maybe perhaps Larry Ellison as well, if you got his details. That would be cool.
Well.
So just last things really, as mentioned, we'd love to project into the future now. So let's set the horizon quite far, which in this space I think several years is. In several years, what might this look like? What could be going on? What are you excited about achieving?
So several years from now, what I'm really excited about thinking through is we don't need to talk anymore about, blockchain and the technology and what it does, because doing that, I mean, it's important, but it's like as if we're talking what is HTTP and what is TCP and all that. We don't need to talk about that anymore, but it's fundamentally changed the way people can work and the way people can realize their full potential. It's enable actually new business cases, but also like more creativity, right? So what we talked about, living differently, basically fulfilling careers differently, even work. What does it mean to work, right? So I think it's that. So when I project and I look at things, I'm thinking, okay, now protocols such as Near are so embedded that we don't need to talk about what it is anymore. But the use cases that are on it are actually so successful that they're used by billions of people.
Unbelievable. Well, look, firstly, really impressed that you had the time to come and be so kind to talk through all of this on the show, because it's so busy right now, so really appreciate it. Let's leave with that because it's such a inspiring vision. Thank you so much for coming on the Searching for Mana show.
Thank you so much for having me.